Jackson, thanks so much for joining me, mate. Lovely to have you on the show as Secretariat for the Labour campaign and ex-Volteface alumni.
Yes.
I nearly said Illuminati there.
No, not yet. No. Thanks for having me back. Delighted, as always.
Yeah, great to see you, mate. Thanks for jumping on. So you must be absolutely delighted. The government have done another cracker of a drug policy decision and decided to make nitrous oxide a Class B drug. You must be absolutely over the moon.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible decision, isn't it? First and foremost, it goes against the advice of the ACMD, which basically looks like they are there essentially exclusively just to be ignored now. There's a long history of governments of both stripes just ignoring them. And this is just the latest in a long line of terrible decisions that goes against their advice, hot on the heels of the work that Matta Busby was doing that was mentioned in the Times about the freedom of information requests, about the sort of decrim report that Alex Stevens had written that was being suppressed by the Home Office. So, yeah, it's not a surprise, and it's equally not a surprise that Labour have backed it, which we can also talk about. But it's a shame.
It's not a surprise at all, is it?
No.
It's a shame, not a surprise. And it begs the question, what's the point of the ACMD?
Yeah, well...
Are we reaching a point where, like, it's just a bit of a joke position?
Yeah, it's a shame.
Already.
It's a noble idea to have this sort of council of experts, but if you're just going to ignore them, there really is no point in them. David Nutt has this idea of this sort of monetary policy committee style thing. So New Labour gave the Bank of England operational independence in 1997 to set interest rates to take that away from political control. And he wants the same sort of thing done for drugs, which is an idea I could say, yeah, I can see the logic behind that.
Yeah, it's definitely an idea. It never happened, but it's an idea.
Well, no, it'll never happen. And also it does raise questions then about sort of a democratic deficit in decision making, like who's accountable for those decisions and how are they held responsible.
Yeah, and then you can, and who even gets into that position in the first place? You could see like that in essence, just being. I mean, yeah, it has. There's a noble quest there, but whether it's a realistic one is a different question.
Yeah,
So I mean, I guess. Go on, mate.
Yeah, I if we're willing to do it for interest rates, which are far more important than drug policy decisions, then perhaps would be fine. But I don't know.
Less controversial, isn't it? Like there's the morality around drugs is just next level. I mean, let's I guess start with the government have made this decision to make nitrous oxide a Class B. Why have they done that? Why do you think they've made that decision?
Fundamentally, it's a political decision. It's about the next election. Rishi Sunak, his whole political project is about delivery. It's about having things that he can point to in the next election, say we've done this, this, and this. And this is something that he can very easily do. There's going to be no opposition in Parliament from his own benches or from the opposition benches or in the Lords. It'll sail through. It's something that it's very easy to sort of say, we're cracking down on this. This is going to stop the littering, or whatever, stop the ASB. It's just a sort of easy win for him. I get the politics behind it. Obviously, it won't work, so it stores up problems. And Labour have stored up a massive problem for themselves if they do ever get in terms of backing this. Because when it doesn't work, and when they get into office, there'll be calls to make it Class B or to crack down on it harder or make it Class A, like we see with cannabis. So, yeah, it's a purely political decision based on a complete disregard for public health. And a sort of almost a sort of sadist there's a sadist streak to it where I almost feel like they enjoy the prospect of criminalisation, and I don't know why, because it doesn't work, and surely they must know it doesn't work. But yeah, purely political decision.
It fires people up, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it fires people up. It fires the base up. The nuance of drug policy is lost on overwhelming majority of the public, and they hear. And what I found interesting about the press releases today and the comments today is they've linked nitrous oxide to antisocial behaviour and littering. They've kind of just entwined the two things, haven't they? So we're not talking about the dangers of nitrous oxide and like the risk factor. We're talking just broadly about littering and antisocial behaviour, which I imagine if you just went up to a member of the public and said, we're going to ban nitrous oxide, but it's going to reduce littering and antisocial behaviour in the community, the overwhelming majority of the public would be like, that's great, that's amazing. The only people that be like, what, that's mad. They're the people that understand and are aware of the kind of drug policy around it and nitrous oxide, right? So it's just this like people pleasing. Do you think politicians know that's going on, or do you think they're just one of the members of their views are just a reflection of the fact most of society has no idea about nitrous oxide?
I think.
Do you think they willingly do it, knowingly go, oh yeah, just do this, it'll make people happy, it's not going to do anything?
No, I think it's a result of their lack of expertise on the subject and their unwillingness to engage in it, because there are enough people out there trying to sell them the evidence, not least the civil service, who push back very hard against this, from what I understand.
Yeah.
It's an unwillingness to engage, and it's a lack of imagination for thinking about how else we might do this. It's a sort of default setting that they always can go back to because they know that it's a crowd pleaser. And it's a shame because there are harms that we should talk about. The littering side of it is very easy, really. Local authorities have had their budgets absolutely slashed since 2010. If you want to sort out littering, just give them more money to sort out littering. It's very simple. We're not banning Coke cans, takeaway boxes, or plastic bags, which contribute, immeasurably higher levels to littering than nitrous oxide canisters. So get rid of them. Properly fund to get rid of the littering. Just properly fund local authorities. Another thing,
and educate the popular, educate nitrous oxide users and say this is a massive problem. You keep doing this, you know what I mean? Like, just do some awareness raising and campaigning around the negative impacts of littering, because you go to festivals, it is a problem.
Yeah, sure.
There are NOS canisters like absolutely everywhere, and there are bins around. It's just people kind of crack.
But littering, littering's very
littering's a problem. Full stop. But I think it's the unique nature of what a NOS canister looks like that makes it stand out. And like, do you know what I mean? People, oh my god, look at this thing, these metal things. But yeah, no, I agree completely.
And this is a symptom of what I've talked about before about MPs viewing drug policy through the prism of their constituencies. And this isn't about the sort of national health harms. This isn't about the very rare cases we're seeing of the sort of nerve damage and B12 deficiencies and whatever that is being sensationalized in the media. It's about people going to the constituency surgeries, people emailing them, people tweeting them. I've worked in an MP's office. I know how this works. Saying, oh, there's some scropes on the park doing nitrous oxide. We've seen the big canisters. You need to do something about this. And they feel pressured to do that. It's very much, I think this is definitely come from the bottom up, for sure.
Yeah. Labour are not good on this either.
No, Labour, I wasn't surprised at all to see them back it, because when you make as big a sort of pitch as Keir Starmer does about his law and order credentials, he was a director of public prosecutions, if you didn't know, about his criminal, sort of background, and about Labour's commitment to safe streets. Last year in the local council elections, they led on ASB. There's already been stuff in the media this year that Labour's going tough on ASB for the local council elections this May. He did his big announcement last week about ASB, and where he said that the smell of cannabis has ruined people's lives. When you stake such a claim to the law and order agenda, you can't then cleave open any space on drugs, as you would do if you didn't back this measure. A combination.
The cannabis thing was similar vibe, wasn't it? It's like the smell is ruining life.
Yeah, it's a combination of.
You're like, oh, you're just mixing things up again, Starmer.
Yeah, it's a combination of Keir Starmer's, I think, authoritarian tendencies, the sort of Blairite lotto advisors who are running the show behind the scenes, and Steve Reed's sort of dinosaur approach to justice. This is the guy that when he led, he's the Shadow Justice Secretary. When he led, I think it was Lambeth Council, he was the guy who sort of introduced naming and shaming drug users, and then he's talked about reintroducing it as part of a Labour government. When you've got that sort of groupthink going on, and they're all patting each other on the back about being the toughest on crime, and in this case, tough on laughing and tough on the causes of laughing, we're unlikely to get a public health, evidence-focused approach to drug policy anytime soon, sadly.
Tough on laughing. Did you make that up, obviously?
No, well, I mean, I made it up.
Tough on laughing and the causes of laughing.
I made it up. I mean, I guess other people may have made it up independently of me as well.
It's yours. You got that. Yeah. That one's yours. Yeah, it's a very frustrating situation for the advocate, isn't it? Kind of seeing how drug policy is playing out in politics. What do you think how do we come back from this? Like, seeing the government regularly ignore the ACMD and putting forward more punitive approaches, which both me and you are popular with the public and are about, gaming this, not gaming the system, but playing the game of politics and making sure you're pleasing your base and not saying anything that's going to cause problems come election. What's the answer? How can we work with that and navigate it? Do you think? What can we do?
I think the drug policies we have are a product of our politics, which is in turn a product of our society. I don't think there is much hope for sort of major drug policy reform without major reform to our politics. I've said this sort of for Volteface and elsewhere. We need a new generation of political leaders willing to stake political capital on the issue. And I think fundamentally one of the things that would enable drug policy reform to be seriously considered would be electoral reform, because it would just completely change the whole nature of our politics. And it would get rid of the tyranny of the marginal seat, whereby at the moment, there are a very small number of voters in a very small number of places of a very specific demographic that essentially, if you appeal to them, you win or you lose. You win or die by your appeal to those people. And that's where these sort of crackdown policies are coming from. They are an attempt to appeal to those people. But, you say they're popular, this sort of crackdown thing, and you're right. But the polling around this is confusing, right? Because people do want to see crims locked up and they do want to crack down on drugs, but then it's also popular to advocate for a public health approach to drugs, and they should treat addiction as a health issue, not a criminal justice issue. And I know we're not talking, apart from in the rarest instances, about addiction in this case, but nevertheless, I think there is a bit of nuance there. And as I've said, Keir Starmer has a unique opportunity. He would have a unique opportunity to forge a new sort of path on drug policy with his law and order background. And the fact that he's not doing that is absolutely criminal.
Yeah, I agree. It often seems to be the case with drug policy as well, that like the groups that, I guess another reason that builds on what we said is the groups that they're targeting are normally young people who neither party is really that bothered about at the moment. Like Labour know that they're not going to lose the young votes, the Tories, and the Tories also know it's not their stance on nitrous oxide that's going to change their votes. It feels like both parties are kind of playing the demographics a little bit as well in lining up that next election, which I guess is kind of frustrating. And in the UK, I feel like we don't really have a great deal of like activism on it. Do you know what I mean? We've not got like loads and loads of young people aggressively campaigning for drug policy laws or putting it on the legislative agenda, which you have seen in North America with things like cannabis, where people can literally take to the streets and force our political system. So I think you make a really interesting point around when we see drug reform take place in other areas. I think the nature of our politics has made that particularly difficult, because we can't take to the street. Like it doesn't really matter what young people think over this. It doesn't really matter what people think around the issue, because they don't really have a lever to pull. Whereas in North America, just their system being quite different, I feel like they've been able to at least get cannabis up there on the political agenda and have states vote for it, because their political system is different.
Well, that's because they have.
Yeah, I think it's
that's because they have recourse to direct democracy. I saw Cassandra Fabrik talk at an event in Parliament, last month or the month before, and she was talking about how a lot of those early cannabis initiatives came from direct democracy. They came from referendums in states. We don't have recourse to that sort of model here. We're never going to have a referendum again, probably after that Brexit referendum and the absolute chaos.
Yeah, I think that's it now. I think we've done our referendum.
So they have different methods. And I think that is symptomatic of a wider thing, that I think political geography is a really underrated influence on drug policy formation, in the sense that you're saying about young people. You're right, of course, this is all about young people. The vast majority of people who use nitrous oxide are young people. This is why we could end up with this sort of absurd prospect that a student doing a balloon at a pre-drinks could end up getting, a jail sentence or an unlimited fine and a criminal record for doing a balloon, when the alcohol they're drinking is far more dangerous to themselves and to everyone else and to the rest of the society. But ultimately, their votes don't matter in under a first past the post system, where young people tend to congregate in urban metropolitan areas where the jobs are, and that's a product of our economic system. Whereas sort of older people are more spread out, and the sort of red wall voters, etc. So I think it's a really neat demonstration of how influential political geography is on our drug policies.
Yeah. And just the fact we don't have a third party, I think they'd get away with it even more. Because if we had a strong Lib Dems who Labour were actually worried about, then Lib Dems could come out and say, we are completely against this Tory position, and here's why. And then Labour would have to be like, well, we can't go. We're going to have to find something in the middle. We're going to have to negotiate those two positions. Whereas right now they're like, may as well just agree. It's a zero risk strategy. Yeah. Just agree with what they're saying.
Well, Lib Dems have come out against.
There is no other party.
To be fair.
Yeah, but there's how many? Yeah, I know they are, but they're not a strong. They're not really.
No, I know. Yeah,
I don't mean that with offence. There's some great Lib Dem MPs. I respect them a lot. My favourite MP of all time, Norman Lamb, Sir Norman Lamb, superb MP. But I just feel like they have no political clout.
No, you're right.
On issues like this, people are just like, leave them to it.
Do you know,
what do you think will happen? Sorry.
Well, do you know how likely you are? Over the last 20 years, the same amount of people have died from being struck by lightning as they have from using nitrous oxide. That's how rare the harms are. I know that the government aren't banning it in terms of the deaths, but I think that's really
ban lightning next.
Lightning, being struck by lightning is literally something that people use as a metaphor for something that's never going to happen. Um, and a lot of these deaths are the result of either people putting plastic bags over their heads and they end up being misadventure deaths, or they're in medical settings. Some of these deaths have been attributed in like hospitals where people are using gas and air. So
Yeah.
the sort of the major harms here are so low, and you see all this sensationalist reporting in the media about the nerve damage and what have you. But there's a BBC News article being shared around today. The woman featured who said that she had pins and needles in her legs and couldn't walk. She was doing 240 canisters a week. That's 10 boxes. 10 boxes of canisters a week. You can die from drinking too much water. The idea that that is in any way a typical usage profile is ridiculous. So I do think we need to keep in perspective just how low the harms are here, relatively speaking, to the individual.
Yeah. Which is why it's such an outrageous decision, and re-emphasizes that point that drug policy is not based on evidence. Drug policy is based on perceptions around the government's perceptions of how people are going to react. They're looking for votes out. They're not looking for genuine, effective evidence. And it seems like one of those things, like a lot of drug policy, where they make a decision, and then whether it's effective or not doesn't really matter because no one really checks or follow. I mean, in 3 years, if we're like, let's look at how this, nitrous oxide use has gone up. The littering actually hasn't changed. There's now been more criminalization. We've wasted more police time of like arresting teenagers and convicting them. Like, I mean, are the government really going to be held accountable? Are journalists going to run it and be like, oh man, let's hold, the government said they were going to do this and hasn't happened. I think they'll probably just say something else.
No.
I mean, Labour would say,
that will happen. That will happen. That will be the situation in 3 years' time. And that's why I was saying earlier about Labour sort of making a rod for their own back, because when that does happen, the journalists will cover it, but they'll cover it as, look, this isn't working. You need to crack down more. You need to make it tougher.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They look at it and they go like, well, yeah, we've just not been hard. We've not given harsh enough sentences. We need to increase the sentencing. And we just go round and round and round, don't we? The merry-go-round keeps going.
Yeah, it just becomes it just becomes a sanctions escalator. It just becomes making it harsher and harsher and harsher, and then it makes it more difficult to renege on. It makes it more difficult to pivot and change approach then, because you're so invested in that sort of prohibitionist criminalization system.
I think dealers are going to start just selling NOS now on groups.
Yeah.
I just think it will go to the illicit market and NOS use will increase because you'll see it on a text. Young people will get it on a text and say, oh, they're selling NOS, 5 canisters for £4 or something or whatever. So the price will go up. The availability will increase because it'll just be spammed around WhatsApp groups left, right and centre. And if anything, if you've got people who, use a little bit of NOS, they're then getting exposed to an illicit market where they can get anything they want, whenever they want. So I think, what's your kind of do you think it'll move to the dealers will sell NOS? I imagine a lot of dealers are just buying out boxes now, thinking there'll be websites shifting this stuff.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see that. It was interesting. I spoke to Guy Jones, one of the chemists from the Loop, and he was saying that that the machinery you need to use to produce this stuff is actually quite heavy duty. So they actually might struggle to sort of start producing it on the illicit market. But I think it'll naturally shift that way. They're not going to pass up another revenue stream, are they? But clearly it then becomes an elevated risk to people, because the stuff you're using at the moment, you at least know is fit for human consumption because it's being used in dentists, in hospitals, in coffee shops. If the black market does sort of end up finding a way to produce it, you can be sure that it'll be lower quality. It may well be filled with stuff that isn't nitrous oxide, or with sort of nasty other sort of elements that we don't know what they are. So I think it'll definitely happen. Yeah, for sure. There's no way that this is going to sort of curb demand or supply. And I think, as I've said elsewhere, I think drug gangs across the country will be laughing. They'll be celebrating at this, and they'll be thanking Suella Braverman and Keir Starmer for handing them another revenue stream.
A lot of what people just start using like cream canisters as well, like squirty cream, because that's what happens in the States, doesn't it? There's loads of people that like smash.
Really?
Yeah, it's got nitrous oxide in it. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't say that.
No, I know, but I didn't realize that you have to get high off using a squirty cream thing.
Yeah, there's less in it. There's still and there's a lot of cream as well. A lot of cream in it. Is there anything positive at all about this? It's really negative. There's not really.
Well, I was thinking there's not much left to ban now, I suppose.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's less to ban. It's slowly.
They've slowly banned the poppers. They could come for poppers, but I think Crispin Blunt would lie down in front of Parliament.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, you mean a room odorizer?
Yeah,
as their clearly sold
But
as.
no, it's an absolutely abominable idea that won't work and is grotesque. And
Yeah.
no, I don't think there's any positive really. Maybe the fact that it started a conversation about it, in terms of, there has been a lot of media coverage about the last couple of days, and the media coverage has been mixed. But I have seen things that will say, a lot of the stuff has focused on this goes against the expert advice, which is the frame that as advocates we would want.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of very skeptical sort of coverage, which is good. It is being framed in the way we want to talk about it. I think. I don't think many people really buy that it will do the ASB crackdown that the government and the opposition are sort of saying that it will. So I suppose that's a positive, but ultimately it's not going to make a difference at the end of the day when later this year people start getting criminal records for doing a balloon.
Yeah, and then as an ex-criminology student, like the whole thing just becomes nonsense anyway, because you say you're doing an antisocial behaviour crackdown. If you just simply arrest more people for antisocial behaviour, you say that was the crackdown rather than an increase. You can't, as long as the police arrest more people, you can validify it either way. The problem is when you don't say you're going to do a thing and then more arrests happen, and people are like, antisocial behaviour is going up, you can be like, oh yeah, it is. Whereas if you say we're going to clamp down and then there's more arrests, you say, well, we did say we're clamping down. When really there could just be like loads more antisocial behaviour. You just don't know.
But
so you just end up in this nonsense.
It is nonsensical because I saw Rudy Fortson's analysis of it, and the sort of lawyer the KC who knows about drug policy, and he was saying, how are you going to enforce this in terms of you'd have to literally catch someone in the act of doing the balloon, because if you've put it into a balloon, as soon as that gas escapes from the balloon, you're no longer in possession of that substance. So, if you've got an actual balloon full of NOS in your hand and you see a copper, they can't
let go of the balloon.
This isn't legal advice, but as far as I understand it, if you let that balloon go, you're no longer in possession of that substance. It's not a crime to have done NOS. That is one thing that we've avoided thus far in this country. We don't criminalize.
Thankfully, not like the Swedes.
Yeah, we don't criminalize having done drugs. I'm sure that will come one day. But for now, that isn't the case. And so the enforcement thing is just an absolute nightmare. It's a joke.
Yeah. So I guess it'll be possession of the canisters, won't it? I imagine it'll be like the actual possession of the canister is a crime, unless it might be I imagine it to be something like, when you're stopped without a driving license and the copper says, "Can I see your driving license?" Say, actually, it's at home. They say, "Okay, well, you've got to report it to the station within 2 weeks or whatever. Otherwise, I don't know. It's never happened to me, but I know that happened. I know that you've got to bring your license, prove you've got a license or whatever. Might be something like that where it's like, oh, you've been caught in possession of canisters. You've got X amount of time to prove that you're a caterer or use it for whatever else. Otherwise, you've been charged with possession. I don't know, but I initially thought it was just the word banning was just going to be like a lot of rhetoric without any action. But it genuinely looks like the possession of any nitrous oxide is going to be illegal. But that then means it's a controlled substance. So like if you're a caterer, you're working, you're a hospital, how on earth it's going to be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
Bringing that, because you'd have to secure it and manage it like a controlled substance.
Yeah, they said they're going to consult over the next few months. Rishi Sunak said in his press conference this morning that he's going to consult with the sort of various industries that have legitimate uses for it, as to sort of how they'll get around it. That I should now have some sort of licensing thing. But you're right, it'll be an absolute nightmare.
All that money spent as well doing that. You just think about
and the red tape.
Just on all the time and money that's spent with government officials and ministers and all these high level people meeting to talk about how do we create a system for you to manage nitrous oxide when it's just not that big a deal. Like it's just not an issue out in the public eye. Like it's just not a problem.
No, and all the things
more bins and more education for kids to say put it in a bit. Like it is annoying. I am with the people that are irritated by nitrous oxide canisters just lobbed everywhere. It's proper scummy behaviour. But take the nitrous oxide away, our kids still being annoying and littering and a bit scummy sometimes. Yeah. Sure, it wasn't the nitrous oxide that was magically making people litter.
Nobody likes littering, and
a broader issue.
Steve Rolls has said, you can get a deposit return scheme, something like that. Or as I say, just properly fund authorities to clear up litter. But that, the point you're making is demonstrative, because all the things that they're seeking to do here, as I said, are already illegal. You can't sell it to kids. You can't drug drive.
Yeah.
They're both illegal. You can't supply recreationally. It's already illegal. You can't litter. That's already illegal. So it just makes no sense from a legal perspective. Anyway, you've got all the powers they need, and this is what the ACMD said under the Psychoactive Substances Act, to enforce those regulations. They're just not doing it.
Yeah.
And so it really is a completely, as you know, disproportionate, unjustified, unnecessary step.
Yeah. Well done, government. Nice one. Another positive episode in the world of drug policy, brought to you by Volteface and J-Jacks. Yeah, there's not much else to say on it other than those key points, really. Fairly disastrous, not based on evidence, likely to lead to increase in harm, as the ACMD rightly pointed out, likely to lead to major problems for completely legitimate services and businesses that rely on nitrous oxide, likely to result in exceptional amounts of money spent on nonsense consultation and chat. But, you know, the government have pleased some people that they were trying to get to vote for them, so they'll see it as a win.
And also, you know, one more thing, on the exceptionally rare cases that do exist of where people have done sort of health harms to themselves from, you know, we are talking sort of stratospheric levels of nitrous oxide use. Those people aren't going to be coming forward, or they're going to be a lot less forthcoming in seeking help for that, whether it be that if they become addicted to it, or if they've sort of caused nerve damage or whatever. You're going to be a lot more nervous about going to hospital, about presenting in medical settings and talking about your symptoms, because you know that it's illegal. So from that perspective as well, you know, it's also a disaster. It's a disaster on so many levels. But then again, you know, so is the whole of UK drug policy. So it's not really a surprise.
Yeah, not all. And on that happy bombshell, Jay, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me, mate.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate your expertise. You made some really good points, and always a pleasure to chat to you, mate. So thanks so much for coming on.
Speak soon.